In a democracy, citizens need to be informed. Informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Errol Parker. COVID-19 virus is a worldwide pandemic that has recently dominated human life, which is unprecedented in modern history. Its economic impact on the American and local economies is the subject of our conversation with Long Beach, California Congressman Alan Lownethal of the 47th Congressional District. Welcome to our program, Alan.
It's a pleasure to be back with you, Errol.
It's been a while, and things have been kind of tough lately. We're going to talk about the national and local economy and the impact that COVID-19 has had on it.
Yes.
Seems, Alan, it seems to be not a coordination between the federal government's response to this virus. Talk about the divide that we're having right now with the Republican and Democrat getting on the same page with how we're going to respond to this virus. Talk to us about that.
Well, I think the best way to kind of understand that is that we do have multiple crises going on. One is obviously a public health pandemic like we've never seen before, with a killer virus where over 80,000 people have already died in the United States. And we're anticipating now the latest modeling that by August, the beginning of August, what is that, maybe 3-4 months, we will be over almost 150,000 will have died, 145,000. So the scope of this, we're now at 1.3 million. There may be people who have the virus. We may be even over 2 million, well over by then. So we're talking about a virus that has had a tremendous impact, will continue to have a tremendous impact. And then we have, as you pointed out, tremendous economic impact from this, because with no vaccine, no treatment, the only real hope is public health, social distancing, physical distancing, or staying at home, or beginning to loosen that slightly as we get those numbers down to figure out how we do it. But everything has to be driven by the data. And to talk about what that difference is, I think the nation can really see the differences between Dr. Fauci and the president. At this moment, polling shows that 2/3 of the nation listens to and believes in Dr. Fauci. 1/3 believes in the president, because the president does not really follow the science the way Dr. Fauci does. Dr. Fauci is really concerned that while we should be moving towards opening up slowly, that he really is so concerned, and this is the differences between many of the parties, not that both don't want to open up, but he's very concerned that we potentially could have a second wave or a third wave this summer. That would be worse, and it would destroy the economy. If we really open up and then we have to close down completely, there will be no public confidence in where we're going. So Fauci is more cautious. The president is more into just moving forward, keep moving forward, pushing to move forward. While I think we all want to do it, I generally think the Democrats are more into being cautious, like where Fauci is, and the Republicans have mostly lined up behind the president and Republican governors. Now, the danger is that as we move forward now, in the states that have not seen large numbers of cases, that's where the new cases are rising now in the country.
That's right.
And so it's not going to be California. California is going to be cautious. It's not going to be New York. It's not going to be Washington State. It's going to be states where we're just now beginning to see what rises that we're going to see. The other point I think that's different between the Democrats and the Republicans, is that the Democrats immediately want to invest in the country to keep if we can't open up everything right now, make sure we pay the workers, pay those small businesses, keep the country ready to open up. The administration, the president, thinks we have time to do that. Well, you and I who live in California know that it's the cities and it's the state that provides the services, and they are totally dependent upon property tax and sales tax to keep this going. Their economy is going to pay for the first responders, to pay for police, to pay for all the city services, education, to pay for the teachers who are now working remotely. And where California had a $21 billion surplus just a year ago.
Yeah.
We're now talking about the largest deficit in the history of the state now at this moment. So the Democrats, the different, say it's really important now, money that we spend now will protect us in the future, protect these, because if we have to restart everything and let people go at this moment, we get rid of half of our police and fire, it's going to be unbelievable to get them done, to rehire them. It'll be much more difficult. So the differences are, do we spend much more now at the federal level? And I think the Democrats are willing to say yes at this moment. And we'll see where the Republicans are.
Well, tell us the packages that the Congress has done. They've like $1 trillion packages to help the small business people. Right. All those kinds of things, they just impact upon the economy, and the budget has been really devastating. Tell us what Congress is doing with legislation to try to help the small business people.
Okay, in doing that, we have to realize that intertwined between helping small businesses is reducing the virus. You got to reduce the virus. If you don't reduce the virus, there is no going to be small businesses or any businesses out there if the virus expands and keeps doing. Because we have to come to grips with that much of our economic activities is based on confidence in the country. People will go back to restaurants if they feel safe.
If they feel safe, yes.
Safe. And the critical word is safe. And so we have to make sure that what we do is done in a safe way, but also to protect protect those businesses. So what the Congress did was, we are now about to pass, we're now dealing with our fifth bill. And when we first started in March, dealing with the crisis, we did our first bill. I think it was around the 3rd of March or the 4th, really the 1st. And that was to promote testing, to do testing. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was to tell the NIH and others to start the testing, get more testing out there. And I think that what we've seen is we had no coordinated strategy, national strategies on getting testing or getting PPEs, which are personal protective equipment. With testing, you need equipment. And when we first started in March, we were in what public health officials call, we were in what we thought would be a containment strategy. We would try to contain the virus. And we wanted to do testing to help to contain the virus before it spread wildly. Well, we never did that. We never got the testing. We couldn't track the virus. By the time we got sufficient testing, all we could do was, at that time, was test the people.
What held that up? What held the testing up?
There are a variety of things. One is, I don't think we ever did the scope of this. We knew the scope of what would be needed, the amount of testing. Two, to do something like this, and again, this is my point of view, to do something of this magnitude, to get, is like a wartime effort. And during the Second World War, the entire nation was on wartime effort. It did make it. If we decided we needed to build tanks, that's it. We were building tanks, and we were stopping it, doing everything that we could, and we were focusing on it. And every business that could was building tanks that was doing that or providing supplies. After, and I think it was the Korean War, we passed something called the Defense Production Act, which gave the administration the power to take wartime activities if we needed to do that. They could demand that businesses do testing, that labs create swabs, demand. Well, early March, when we first started to do testing, we also asked we didn't have to pass legislation, although I wrote a letter, and many of the members of Congress, to the administration. Just use that we've given you this tool to do the Defense Production Act, invoke it, set somebody up, and demand that we do testing everywhere, and that everybody is that we have a comprehensive approach to testing. Well, that never happened. The administration didn't want to kind of oversee it and become in control of the testing. They said, well, let's let the states do that or other people.
That's right.
Said, this is a national epidemic. The virus doesn't know state lines. The virus, you've got to have a national policy. Well, they were very reluctant to develop a national policy. They said, we'll help. We understand what's needed. And when you call upon us, we'll try to do it. We said, well, you're going to set a competitive thing. States are going to come. We don't have the materials. We don't have the labs. We're missing some of the equipment. Some of even if we have the swabs, we don't have the lab elements like to find out what's on the swabs later on. We need a national effort and a national plan. Say, we're not going to do that. We're not going to have that. We're going to help. So that led to some real serious kinds of issues. And so after that plan, and that wasn't a hell of a lot of money, we did the second stage about 2 weeks later. And that was, I think, the March 15th. And that was the family first. We said, oh my goodness, this is now beginning to impact the community. It's really here now. Let's the Congress, and this was done in a bipartisan way, let the Congress then say that families can have family leave. There can be more, personal leave, health insurance. Companies can't fire you if you have to do this. Let's add to the thing that we've done with testing by providing more benefits for families to be able to access money, to be able to make sure that health insurance would pay for it all. Because we did at that time, the administration was into getting rid of the Affordable Care Act without anything to replace it. We were real concerned, who's going to pay for all this? We've got to start to build into the law that anybody can get, treatment if there's treatment available without having even health insurance. So that was the early battle. Then we became more and more aware as the virus began to spread by the end of March that we are in a massive pandemic. And we did a bill that was the first CARES Act bill. And that was, I believe, $2.2 trillion at the time, the largest bill at the time. So now we're up to about...
That's the largest ever in American history?
Well, I don't know if we ever counted that because money is different. I'm not
different
sure.
Now, okay.
Of course, we had done it before and huge amounts of money we had spent, but there were differences in the amount, what a trillion. But we have never passed legislation at that point larger than a $2 trillion bill.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yes.
So we did a $2 trillion bill, and we said, look, we've got to make sure we're not going to do the same mistakes that we did with when there was the collapse in the economy in 2008. We did this bailout to companies, and then many of them just turned that into stock options and used that money for their own benefit. It never got. So we said we're going to focus, at least in the House, and we got into battles with Mnuchin and the leadership in the Senate. We said, if we're going to be involved, the House also in this, we want the money that goes to corporations to go to those monies. We're going to loan the money, well, these companies, primarily smaller businesses, but even larger ones, if they use that money to keep their employees working. That was going to be the emphasis. They couldn't use it for stock options. They couldn't use it for anything else. They had to use that money. And if they did that, those loans would be forgiven. They would be forgiven loans. So it'd be like a grant, but they had to commit them to the workers. So that was our first, to create monies to businesses. And we thought we would do at first small businesses with the largest amount of money. And we also said people need money in their pockets right away. And so we did the largest investment in that first package at the end of March in direct payments, cash payments to people. Now, a lot of people said, well, it took a while to get it, but it was in that bill that everybody who was eligible, who earned up to $75,000, from nothing to $75,000, you were going to get $1,200 in your pocket, a check sent to you. And if you had dependents, who were living at home under 16, I think it was, or under 18, they would each get $500. Your spouse would get $1,200. So you could get, up to 35 or so, family of 4. You would get
So
a cash.
this was a one-time deal, right?
One-time deal then. We didn't know how long this was going to last. You're going to get cash in your pocket. We also said, if you're going to be unemployed, we need you to make sure that you have enough money to get by besides the one-time cash payment and besides the money to businesses to keep you employed. We're also going to send you, when you go to unemployment, which is administered by the states, much of the money comes from the federal, but each state has their own unemployment office. Like here in California, we have the EDD that does the unemployment. If we're going to tell the states, as soon as somebody qualifies for unemployment, and what we're going to do is greatly expand who qualifies for unemployment. Historically, before the end of March of this year, you had to work for a long period of time. You had to make sure that you were an employee in a business. We said, oh my God, there are a lot of digital employees, small mom and pop employees that never would qualify for that. They were part-time workers. So we said, we're going to change the rules. We're going to make the people who are eligible for unemployment to expand who's eligible. We're going to have unemployment not just for 13 weeks or 26 weeks, going to go for a year. And we're also, the federal government is going to give everybody who's eligible for unemployment is going to get a $600 a week check for the first time. So you would get up to $2,400 in addition to what you were getting on your own.
Now, is that one time or is that over a period of time?
That was going to be for the couple of months.
Okay.
And then we were going to see how long we'd run out of money. That cost us, between the small business loans, between the one-time shot in the arm, the $1,200 you were going to get, plus the expansion of unemployment, that was $1.5 trillion. $2 trillion. So
that was unprecedented as well, right?
Unprecedented. That's where. So that's the middle of March. We then found that when we did things so fast, that by within a week after we had done a $2 trillion, bill. Within a week, Errol, we found that, oh my God, the lineup for small business loans is out of sight and people are having hard times accessing it. And there are real problems in it because a lot of larger corporations are able to access the small business by only counting a part of it, or restaurant chains, if they could do it as long as any individual chain was less than 500 employees in that chain. So we found that that a large number of businesses were applying for these, which really shouldn't have been. We tried to get the administration to change that at that time, but they said, no, we'll do it again. But then we realized we're running out of money. So after we did the $2 trillion bill, then which was the end of March, in the middle of April, or the middle of late, we found out we're running out of money for the small. So we did an emergency relief package, which was our 4th bill. And now that was about $500 billion. And that was to expand the PPP program and to make sure that we really wanted to focus in the beginning on small mom and pop businesses. That's who we wanted this to be. And we found that those small businesses were having a hard time because when they would go to the banks, what we had done in the PPP program, even though it was administered by the Small Business Administration, you really went to the bank, who you had a relationship with. You went to the bank and you said, I'm eligible for a PPP loan. This is my data. The bank then agreed to it, and then you went back to the SBA and you got it all done.
Alan, we got to take a small break for about a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back with more historical analysis of what's going on in Congress after these messages. Welcome back with Conversations with Errol Parker. We're with 47th Congressional District Representative Alan Lownethal of Long Beach, and we are talking about the impact of the COVID-19 virus and what the Congress is doing in terms of getting monies to small businesses and helping people who really need help with regard to this impact. Alan, would you continue? You were giving us an historical analysis of what the Congress is doing, the bills that they're trying to pass to get relief to the general public. Go right ahead.
So up until now, we've been working in a bipartisan way. And the biggest issue has been, how do you get that money, either direct payments, especially to people who didn't file income taxes or IRS doesn't have a record. And so we worked real hard on it. My office would get lots of calls about, haven't gotten my payment yet, I need my payment, which is reasonable. And the other one was, lots of small businesses felt that they weren't able to access the PPP or the program where their loans would be, they would not have to pay them back if they kept their employees on them. And so about a couple of weeks ago, towards the end of April, as that program, which was oversubscribed, the small business, we realized we had to make some changes. We had to begin to fund not the larger banks, but to put money away into the smaller banks, the community banks, what we call the CDFI, Community Development Financial Institutions, banks and institutions that really had relationships in the community, that the mom and pop stores in the Latino or African American community or Asian community, they had access to, because a lot of these businesses had no access to the larger banks. So we began to put money in, and that was very successful. And that leads us up to where we are now in the middle of May. And what we're going to go through. Where do we go? Do we need another bill? The Democrats believe that unless we do a bill now that gets more money into people's pockets, that helps rental assistance, that helps homeowners with their mortgages, and helps local cities, local counties, we're going to have an economic collapse of state and local governments, because they're just going to have to lay off. So that's where we are now. We will be voting by this week, which when I'm talking to you, it's the middle of May. We will be voting on the end of this week on a package to put money back. Primarily, it's a $3 trillion package. Over $1 trillion, or up to $1 trillion, is automatic, goes back to the state governments. $500 billion goes right to state government, and about a little bit under $400 billion goes to local governments. So for example, Long Beach would receive approximately $440 million in this package. That would not come all at once. They'd probably get about $250 million this year. And then next spring, they would get the last $150 million.
Let me ask a question, Alan. Let me ask a question here. How can we guarantee that money will get to the grassroots small businesses, the mom and pop businesses? Sometimes bureaucratic red tape.
That's a
Go right ahead. No.
The direct payments, we know if we can put them out, and the unemployment, that's getting to people who are the most impacted. We just want to make sure that system works now, and we've gotten everybody who needs to get a check. And now going into this, we've pretty much solved that problem. When you have 330 million people in this country and sending out direct checks to everybody, we also made it easier for those, for people who are not in the system. While there is no direct checks going to people who are not documented, in the past bill, what happened, if you were in a family, one person was documented, one wasn't, you couldn't get that money. But now families can get that money as long as somebody in the family can get it. We would like to do even more, but that's really what we think we can get through.
What about the small businesses? How are we going to get the mom and pop small business?
Money, what we're going to do now for small businesses is to do two things. And it's not just small business. We've now found, after giving out already almost $2 trillion, the biggest problem that we have now is businesses of under 10 employees.
Okay.
And also, what helps small business are those local nonprofits in the community, which are supportive kinds of institutions, which are also running out of money, which are tremendously beneficial for the running of our community. So what we're going to do now is to give out these loans to the smallest businesses, 10 or under. We've now seen that businesses more than 10 employees pretty much have exhausted the loan.
Yes.
But it's the smallest businesses. So that's what we're going to do now. when you file an application, and we're going to try to also give emergency assistance for some businesses to up to $10,000.
What type of businesses?
Huh? What type of businesses?
Businesses will get these types of support.
Well, any small business that's under 10 people.
Okay.
And any nonprofit in the community can also apply for this money if you provide social supports to people, because they're running out of money also. And those are the things that keep the vitality of our community going, are the businesses and the nonprofits that work together. And what we're going to be targeting now, if the bill passes, are the smallest of the businesses. And because the other businesses pretty much know how to access the money, it's the small folks that don't. And we're going to give more money to the community, to credit unions, to local community banks, not to the large guys.
Well, no,
that's the gap.
Alan, your Republican colleagues, what are they thinking about this legislation that the Democrats that you articulated? Is there a chance of bipartisan support for this?
We're going to see that on Friday. I think that what the Republicans are saying, why don't you give us a time, a couple of weeks, to see how this is all working out? You know, we're not opposed to what you're doing. We don't know if we're going to like everything in the bill, but we don't want to vote on it now because we just passed a couple of weeks ago these emergency measures, and then give us a chance to see how it works. Our response to that is we've heard from every city, every county, Republican governors, Democratic governors, that they need an immediate infusion of money now, or else they're going to have to lay off everybody in the state governments. And this is bipartisan in terms of Republican governors and Democratic governors, Republican cities, little city, they all want us. And the biggest need right now is to help small businesses, help people who are unemployed, and to help right now states and local government. And that's what we're focusing. Republicans think we have a couple of weeks. The mayors and the cities are saying we don't have any time.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit.
And I think there was
Alan, let's in the time we have remained. Well, we got some time. Let's talk about the ports of Long Beach. What type of impact it has had on the ports of Long Beach, and it certainly has had an impact. What kind of relief and assistance you're going to provide the ports?
Well, that's an interesting question because the ports were some of the first to be impacted by this because our ports, especially, are primarily the Asian trade, and much of it is with Southeastern Asia and also with China, and we kind of shut that down. So immediately through the first quarter, our ports were hurt very badly.
That's right.
And we try to get them protective equipment and that. But what has happened since then and has been that the ports, their volumes have dropped, but they've been pretty consistent. And people in the country still are buying goods. They're still doing it. Not as much as they were before. And so the ports have had a 20-25% drop. Now, that's a lot different than businesses that had a 50 or 100% drop. So the ports are functioning, and now they're predicting they're going to have decreased numbers of containers coming through for the year, but it's not going to be more than 20-25% is where we are. And so they're able to, their biggest issue is to make sure they can access some of this money.
Yes.
And especially in terms of infrastructure that they need. That's an ongoing problem. They don't want it, they don't want that to stop their own development. And the other thing is to make sure that they have protective equipment for their employees. They do have protective equipment now. So they're not, so they saying we are a barometer of where the nation is. We are beginning to reestablish our trade with Asia. We are getting things up. It's not as much as it was before. We're going to have a tough time for the next year or so, 2 years, who knows how long. But it's reached kind of a stable point. It's not continuing to decrease. Our inputs, what has really decreased has been our exports. They have dropped off almost to nothing. And we're not buying cars. So a lot of those ships that bring cars over, they've been in a decrease. And so there's no doubt there's been an impact. We are very concerned about the smaller ports in the nation that did not have the revenues to purchase or to obtain protective equipment and things. Our larger ports here in LA, Long Beach, and in Seattle and New York, they were able to do that. But some of our smaller ports are hurting much, much more than our larger ports. So Long Beach and LA are hurting, but they're going to survive and be okay. They're going to get through this crisis.
Okay, well, a couple of more questions, Alan. Even though Terminal Island is not in your district, the highest impact on COVID-19, they have experienced that. What is being done, but the Congress is being done to kind of mitigate that in that particular Terminal Island place?
Well, you are seeing that there are unique places where there are tremendously high numbers of people who are getting COVID-19 virus. And one of them is in our jails and our prisons throughout the nation. That is throughout. 2 is in our congregate living facilities for seniors. And 3 are in these humongous meatpacking plants where
That's
people
right.
Those 3 groups, and we have large numbers in urban areas also and communities in doing that. But in congregate living, those are the 3 largest: jails, prisons. There was no leadership at the federal prisons about this, what had happened. And so we're seeing federal prisons all over the nation that have had this problem. And actually, the federal prisons made a number of mistakes. So, for example, here when we began to hear about it, because we didn't begin to hear about it until not from the federal prisons, not from the wardens, we began to hear it when residents or people began to contact mostly Representative Badagon's district and saying, what's going on? I can't visit my person. They have claimed that they have the virus. And that's when we began to understand. So that the first issue is there was a lack of communication going on. The federal prisons were not letting us, just as many of the jails and prisons statewide and jails throughout the nation were not letting out the issue. And as you can tell, we didn't even know much about what was going on in nursing homes early on until we figured. So all of this is a real issue and a problem. So what happened at the federal prisons were, and I have visited, I don't know if you spent any time in Terminal Island, people are packed together, but the federal prison staff in Washington made a decision that during this virus, they did not want the staff to wear masks and personal protective equipment on them because they did not want to scare the inmates. Well, that was the worst decision that could happen, because all that meant was that as the public health or the law enforcement who were not wearing masks, everybody the virus was being spread from prisoner to law enforcement to prisoner. And so we ended up, by the time we even knew, because there was a flare up, they tested everybody in the prison, and they found there were over 600 people in the prison, 690 who had the virus. I don't remember the exact number of staff that had the virus, and as of now, 7, I think, prisoners have passed away. What they did was open up, get people out of their cells, put them in tents, keep them separate, but the barn door had already been opened, and we had not really prevented the viral spread. We have put into this latest bill a couple of $100 million for federal prisons and money to also get a state and jails. We have a real problem in congregate living, and we have to figure out why we have so many people in prison who are who really could be released. So we've kind of written to the Attorney General, Mr. Barr, to begin to release some of these prisoners in the federal prisons, who shouldn't be there, who are not dangerous people, who are not. I think they've identified 49 or 50 here in Terminal Island, but they've only released now 5 of those 50. So they're very slow, and I can understand people don't want to, the prison system is reluctant to do that, just as the jails are reluctant to, we have to look at redesigning and what we want for our prisons, because if we have, it's congregate living, prisons, as I pointed out,
Nursing homes.
They are like petri dishes. You can't stop it. The best way to stop it is to separate and prevent people and not to have the virus, and to protect everybody and protect them, and to do testing. And that was the other big issue. We have not really had the testing to do community testing. And I'll just kind of end this part right here. If you're a public health person, the first stage is what you want to do is to contain the virus. And then you do community testing, you see where it's growing. Well, we never got a chance in this country to really do, because we didn't have the testing early on, to really test what was going on in community. So we got to the second stage much too fast, and that was mitigation. We already had people already suffering from the disease. And so all the testing that we did was to identify people who are already sick, or frontline workers, to make sure they weren't sick. But that's all the testing we could do. So we couldn't contain the virus. All we were trying to do was to mitigate the virus. We're now at a stage, as we're beginning to open up, that we need far more testing, because we really want to go back to containment. We want to identify people who, before they even show symptoms, have the virus, and we want to identify who they've been in contact with. We want to isolate those people that they've been in contact with for 14 days. Well, that means that you're going to need, in communities, especially in high-risk communities, those are urban centers where people live more densely. We've got to identify and put resources into places where people, if they're going to self-quarantine, they're not going to infect their family. And that's what's happening. That's why we have such large in urban areas, because families are getting affected. You can't quarantine people because they don't have enough room to have a special room.
Having said that, Alan,
and that's what we're going to have to do.
Having said that, Alan, the African-American community has been very, very hit very hard nationally.
Very hard.
This epidemic. And locally, some local representatives have podcasts and Zoom conferences. Rex Richardson just started a series of that. What is your office doing in terms that we have some African-Americans, a percentage of African-Americans in your district? Specifically, what do you plan to do in terms of joining with the local authorities and leaders to try to mitigate this situation? And the final question would be, give us some hope in terms of this bipartisan thing that's missing in this national coordination. Let's address the African-American community first. What is your office doing, and what are you going to try to do to work?
Well, we're working with it. As I just pointed out, we've got to make sure that right now, where we are, is that as we begin to do more contact tracing, that we begin to identify people in the community, we begin to provide the resources immediately to be able to do, which means that whether it's the AmeriCorps program, we're going to need hundreds of thousands of people. Just like all those Peace Corps volunteers that have returned home, all those people who have volunteered, we're going to need them to do contact tracing, because we're only going to stop it in communities when we can trace it, and we can provide them the services to keep it from spreading at this moment.
Okay.
There are long-term things that we have to do in terms of, we have to make sure that those families are not homeless, do not lose their housing, their rent, their mortgage payments, they don't have bad credit, all of those. But immediately now, what we have to do is to make sure that we train people from the community to understand that we were going to have to do more assessments in the community, and if there are certain communities that are more at risk, they're going to need more resources right away. And the first resource that every community needs is adequate testing, that they can see where is that spread going. We can only prevent this if we know where that spread is, and we don't know. Before, all we did was use the testing for people that were already sick. We didn't have enough. Now we have to do that. If we're really interested in reducing the spread in urban areas, that's where we're seeing it, we have to have contact tracing and testing and resources for people. If we're going to isolate them for 2 weeks, that there are hotels and places where they can stay, where they don't infect their families. And they have to get services. They have to make sure they have food. They have to make sure that they have access to things that everybody else does. So you're talking about a focused strategy. Then in the long run, we have to look at what are where do we go from here? We have to raise issues about what kinds of housing do we want to do in the future. We have to raise what are the issues? How do we deal with seniors? Because the largest number of minority African American or Latino or Asian or even is older African American Latino. That's really where people are. We're going to have to look at lifestyle things. The best predictor of not end up in an incubator is that you don't have a pre-existing condition. You don't have a pre-existing condition, it's because you've had health care and you've been able to go to your doctor. If you're really concerned about making sure that we make sure that the most vulnerable population, we have to give them the tools that prevent this disease. And one of the tools is that you have an ongoing relationship all the time with your physicians or healthcare, and you can get identified early on before you have these underlying conditions. So we've got to deal with issues of obesity. We know where there's greater amounts of obesity. We have to deal with education. So we're dealing with the fundamental issues around poverty is what you're getting to. And this nation has to make a commitment in the future, because we're not going to solve it all right now, that it's not us versus them. It's not Americans versus immigrants. It's we're all in this together. And unless we all feel safe, none of us feel safe. And that's where we are. And that's going to mean that there's going to be, and that's why we're putting up $3 trillion now, because there are a lot of people who are not safe at this moment. And better to start doing it, fixing it now than to wait. And I think that's the real difference now between the two parts. Democrats are saying, it's not that we conceptually are any smarter or we know what needs to be. We know that this needs to be done now. Republicans are more cautious and don't want to do it at this moment. I believe that ultimately we're going to have to really open up the nation. People have to feel safe, and we have to know where that disease is moving. We have to, and we have to have relationships in every community, and people are trusted. Right now, nobody trusts anybody. To do contact tracing, you think people are screaming and yelling about wanting the place open. Wait till we do contact tracing and we tell people you're going to be tested now. People are going to say, I don't want to do that. So we're going to have real supports in our community if we're really concerned about that, and really move to a model that really, I think, is more of a public health model. But that's where we.
Congressman Lowenthal, we want to thank you for the education that you've given us today. People need to listen to the health experts as well as the leaders in the community. There's not a lot of trust. You have been an eternal optimist how long as I've known you, and you've given us some hope. And we trust that
we'll get through this, and we will be stronger at the end. But it's going to mean there's going to be a great transition in the society if we are. And I think people are realizing that things are not going to be exactly the same when all these orders are lifted. But in many ways, hopefully, it'll be better for more people than it was before.
Well, we hope so. That's the only way we're going to get through this.
That's right.
Across the aisles and across the neighborhoods, and do it together. Thank you so much, Congressman Lowenthal, for your time and information about what your office is doing and what's been happening on a national level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Errol. It's been a great talking to you.
Okay, that was Congressman Alan Lownethal, the 47th Congressional District, outlining what the federal government is doing and how the money and resources are trickling down to the small businesses and the mom and pops and the neighbors. And we're into this fight together. It's going to be a tough fight, but Congressman, we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on Conversations with Errol Parker with another exciting guest. Good night.
Good night.
In a democracy, citizens need to be informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Errol Parker.